Bombshell tonight in the Nolan Wells investigation. Tonight, a Nolan Wells phone evidence torpedo. Good evening. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. I want to thank you for being with us.
It's going to blow your mind at the reality that the family have not turned over the Nolan's phone to investigators. That means a month into this, accusations of a crime will never be investigated because they will not turn it over to law enforcement. How are you going to present this to a grand jury and you claim that there's evidence of impropriety, criminal activity, tampering with evidence, deleting things from a phone is a crime? And the family is saying, and the family attorney is saying there's a crime that's committed, but they're unwilling to send the information to investigate, to make arrests in this case. It is blowing my mind. So Don, let me address that. Roll it.
As the legal team has stated previously, including during our in-person meeting with Wells family and counsel, we have been and remain ready and willing to cooperate, arranging a joint forensics inspection of Nolan Wells' personal cell phone. During that meeting, we specifically discussed having an examination conducted through the digital forensics lab at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, as well as the possibility of FBI involvement in that process. Our position has not changed. We are prepared to coordinate a mutually agreeable date and procedure for the examination of the phone. Accordingly, to the extent there has been any suggestion that we have been unwilling to have or have failed to cooperate with the investigation, we want to make it clear, that this is not the case. You also previously indicated that Dr. Mitchell would be provided an opportunity to review the materials necessary for him to complete an autopsy review. We remain prepared to facilitate that process. Please provide us with available dates and times for Dr. Mitchell to review those materials, along with any instructions necessary to arrange his access.
Enough. I just want y'all to hear Don Lemon say it. Yeah, I just want y'all to hear Don Lemon read. You're watching this on the 12th. It was yesterday. They sent out a letter, I think late in the evening, about the fact that they have not given over the phone. Now, let's put this in perspective real quick. It's not an excuse to say, well, we don't trust the justice system to give his phone to them to do a forensic investigation. Well, then what you're saying is that you're not willing to accept anything that they're going to say. This is par for the course, in my opinion, with Benjamin Crump. No criminal justice, only payouts and money grab. It appears to me that they only want lawsuits against these boys, wrongful death suits, and money. It's not finding out what happened to Nolan.
Important thing, right? We don't know how Nolan Wells died. No one here is saying we know. But what we do know is Morgan, Jax, and Warren had nothing whatsoever to do with Nolan Wells' death.
Oh, these little liars. I told y'all that Jax was the ringleader. I told y'all. He sat in this interview and he was telling stories about shit that he wasn't even there to witness. So let's break down some of the stuff that I heard in this interview. Let's start with Warren's first phone call, because y'all will remember that Warren said that he was over at Ava's house for that 4th of July party when they all started realizing that Nolan was missing, and he called Miss Christine at 11 o'clock.
One of the first things I told Miss Christine Wells in the first phone call that ever occurred with anything to do with Nolan Wells being gone, because I was the first person to call Miss Christine about anything. First phone call, anything to do with Nolan Wells, was me making a phone call to Christine Wells. And one of the first things I said to her, with multiple witnesses here, pull up the phone call if you want. She said, oh, well, Nolan's location is with y'all at, where the house we were at. And I was like, well, no, he left his phone with us. I told her this.
And yesterday, the same time that this interview came out, Christine Wells said this.
360 says that he's on land, and he was like, well, no, I mean, we have his phone.
So both versions of the story say that Warren didn't tell her about the phone until after she confronted him with the 360. Now, Warren tells Miss Christine that he knows somebody in the Coast Guard and that he's going to call them, which is very fucking different than calling the Coast Guard, which absolutely explains why the Coast Guard came out and said at first that they had not received a call from the kids that night. The Coast Guard's initial statement said they weren't informed until 12:30. Then the Coast Guard later changed their story and said, oh wait, actually we did. And it seems to me that that first call was most likely an off-the-record to a friend kind of deal, which means these people freaked out and didn't call the Coast Guard until after all these people showed up at Jax's house. Which would explain why in the course of this interview it went from Warren called the Coast Guard to we did. Now when the subject turns to how the family got the phone back from these boys, you'll notice that there was a couple slip-ups.
There is a phone sitting at the center of the Nolan Wells investigation, and right now, nobody can tell the public what is on it. That is what makes the latest development so important. Because while a woman on TikTok is drawing attention to details surrounding Nolan's final hours, his family is pushing for something far more concrete. They want Nolan's phone forensically examined, not by one side, not behind closed doors, but jointly, with the relevant experts involved. And according to the family's attorneys, they are ready to do it now. So here is the question I want you to keep in mind throughout this story. If Nolan's phone contains nothing important, why is everyone so focused on getting it examined? And if it does contain something important, what could it tell us about Nolan's final hours? Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because this is a case that continues to change, and I want you with us as each new piece of verified information comes out. Now, we need to be careful about something. There are claims circulating on TikTok about Nolan Wells. Some people online are presenting themselves as having information that others do not. Some are examining the distress call recording. Some are questioning the timeline. Some are discussing Nolan's friends. And some are suggesting that important details have been overlooked. But a TikTok video is not an investigative report. A person saying, "I found something," does not automatically mean that something has been established. So tonight, we're going to do something different. We're going to look at what the TikTok discussion is raising, and then compare those questions with the evidence that has actually been reported. Because there is already something very real behind the social media conversation. Nolan's family has gone after the digital records. On July 28th, court subpoenas were issued to Life360, Snap, Meta, TikTok, and WhatsApp, seeking records connected to Nolan's accounts. The requests include account information, communications, posts, photographs, videos, and location-related information. That is not a TikTok rumor. That is a legal action. And it tells us that Nolan's digital footprint is considered potentially important enough for the family to seek records from multiple companies. Think about what that could mean. A message can have a timestamp. A photograph can show where somebody was. A video can establish who was nearby. A location record can potentially help establish where a device was. And a company's server records can sometimes provide information that is no longer visible on the physical phone. That last point is particularly important, because the question surrounding Nolan's phone is not simply whether the phone exists. It does. The question is, what information remains on it? What may be missing, and whether outside records can help reconstruct anything that is no longer visible. In a July 30th discussion about the case, digital forensics expert Dr. Jim Jones explained that investigators could potentially compare information stored by service providers with what remains on the phone. If the provider's records show that a message, image, or video passed through an account, but the corresponding material is missing from the phone, that discrepancy could become relevant. But let's be precise. That does not mean someone deleted Nolan's information. It means a forensic comparison could potentially determine whether information is missing. There is a huge difference. And that distinction is going to matter throughout this investigation. Because one of the biggest problems with the Nolan Wells case has been the amount of speculation surrounding information that has not yet been independently established. Now we come to the woman on TikTok. Her discussion has brought renewed attention to the distress call and the question of what can be heard in the background. The recording itself is real. The boat did make a distress call. The caller reported that the vessel was taking on water and needed assistance. And people have spent weeks listening to that recording, trying to determine what the background voices mean. Some interpretations online have focused on references to Nolan. Some listeners believe they hear words suggesting people aboard the boat knew Nolan was dead. Others interpret the audio differently. And this is where we have to slow down. Hearing something in a noisy recording is not the same as proving what was said. And even if a word can be established, identifying who said it is another question entirely. That is why the TikTok discussion should be treated as a lead, or a question, not as a conclusion. But there is a reason the audio matters. Because the public has been given one explanation of Nolan's final hours. His friends have said Nolan chose to remain on Horn Island. They have said he was with a girl and believed he had another way back. That account has been challenged by Nolan's family. And the phone could potentially help test parts of that story. Because if Nolan was planning to remain on the island, perhaps there are messages showing that. If he expected to leave with his friends, perhaps there are messages showing that too. If he was communicating with someone shortly before the boat departed, that could matter. If his location data places his phone somewhere unexpected, that could matter. And if the phone contains nothing useful, that is information too. This is why I don't want this story to become another online argument over whether somebody looks suspicious. We need something better than that. We need evidence. And that brings us to the dispute that has now developed over the actual forensic examination of Nolan's phone. The family's attorneys have said they are ready to participate in a joint forensic examination. According to recent reporting, the family proposed a joint process involving forensic experts and potentially the FBI or the Digital Forensics Lab at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College. But there has been disagreement over the logistics. The family says there were discussions about how the phone would be examined, who would be present, how the evidence would be preserved, and how both sides would have access to the results. The district attorney's office, meanwhile, has its own position on how the investigation should proceed. And that has created a situation where both sides say they want the evidence examined, but they have disagreed about the procedure. That may sound like a technical argument. It isn't. Because when you're dealing with evidence from a dead person's phone, the process matters. Who receives the device? Who creates the forensic copy? Who controls the original? How is the data preserved? Who gets to examine the extraction? Can another expert independently verify it? Those questions exist for a reason. The goal is to make sure that whatever information is recovered can actually be trusted. And now, according to a report published this week, the family has given the DA's office a window between August 18th and August 21 for the joint examination. That puts the phone at the center of the story right now. And it brings us back to the TikTok woman. Because social media is producing theories, the family is pursuing records, and the investigators have evidence that the public has not seen. The most important question is whether those three things will eventually meet. Will the phone confirm what people have been saying? Will it contradict the public timeline? Will it reveal communications nobody knew about? Or will it simply fail to answer the questions everyone hopes it can? We don't know yet. And that is exactly why this story is worth following. Because Nolan's phone is not a theory. It is physical evidence. And if it is properly examined, whatever it contains can potentially be tested against the stories that have been circulating for weeks. That is much more powerful than another viral video. Because the question isn't simply what people on TikTok believe happened to Nolan Wells. The question is, what does Nolan's own digital record say? The most important thing about Nolan Wells's phone may be something that isn't on the phone at all. It could be the information that exists somewhere else, on a server, inside an account, in a location tracking application, or in a message history that can be compared with whatever remains on the device. That is why the subpoenas issued by Nolan's family are so important. They didn't simply ask for one photograph or one message. According to court documents reported by ABC News and WAPT, the family's legal team sought records from Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, WhatsApp, and Life360. The requests include account information, communications, photographs, videos, and location data. The companies were given 21 days to respond to the subpoenas, according to WAP's reporting. Now imagine investigators reconstructing Nolan's final day. They have the physical phone. They have witness statements. They have photographs. They have videos. They have the distress call. And then they receive records from the technology companies. Suddenly, they may have another timeline to compare against the first one. Maybe everything matches. That would be useful. Maybe something doesn't match. That could be even more important. For example, suppose a witness says Nolan was not communicating with anyone during a certain period. If investigators find a message sent from his account during that same period, they have a discrepancy. That does not automatically mean the witness lied. Someone else could have had access to the account. The device could have been used by another person. There could be another explanation, but it would create a question that needs answering. And that is the correct way to approach this investigation. Not, we found a message, therefore somebody is guilty, but we found a message. Who sent it? When was it sent? Where was the device? And how does that fit into the timeline? That is forensic thinking. And it is especially important in this case because the family has questioned the story that Nolan simply chose to remain behind. His friends have said Nolan stayed on Horn Island because he wanted to spend more time with a girl he had met. According to their account, Nolan was repeatedly encouraged to return to the boat, but chose not to. More recently, friends described their last interactions with Nolan and said he told them he had another ride back. But Nolan's family has questioned whether that behavior was consistent with what they knew about him. And the account involving Katie McCormick has added another complication. Katie was reportedly the young woman Nolan was speaking with on the island. Her sister, Gracie, has disputed aspects of the account surrounding Nolan's decision to stay. That means the investigation is dealing with different recollections of the same critical period. And that is exactly where digital evidence could become useful. A person can misremember a conversation. A person can misremember a time. A person can forget what happened 5 minutes earlier. A phone may not. A phone can preserve timestamps. An account can preserve login information. A location service can preserve location history. A social media platform can have records showing that something was uploaded or transmitted, even if the content later disappears from the device. Again, none of this guarantees a breakthrough, but it gives investigators a way to test memories. And that's important because the case contains a significant timeline gap. A recent independent analytical review reportedly concluded that the available evidence still leaves a material gap between Nolan's last independently corroborated sighting and the reported departure of the boat. That is one of the reasons the phone matters so much. If the phone can help fill that gap, it could become extremely important. If it cannot, investigators will have to rely on other evidence. But there is another issue. What happens if the phone itself is missing information? This is where the server records become interesting. Imagine that a photograph appears to be missing from Nolan's phone. By itself, that doesn't prove anything. Maybe the photograph was deleted weeks earlier. Maybe the phone automatically removed it. Maybe it was backed up elsewhere. But if a platform's records show that the photograph was uploaded or transmitted during the critical period, investigators have another piece of information. And if the timing corresponds with Nolan's final hours, the question becomes even more important. That is the kind of comparison a digital forensic examiner can make. It is also why the family is seeking records from multiple companies rather than relying entirely on the physical phone. Because no single device necessarily contains the complete story. And there is another reason to examine the phone carefully. The family has raised concerns about the absence of expected July 4th material on the device. Reports have described questions about why there appeared to be less activity than the family expected from a young man who was spending a holiday on an island with friends. But once again, absence is not proof. Maybe Nolan simply wasn't using his phone. Maybe he had poor reception. Maybe the phone was somewhere else. Maybe another person had it. Maybe content was deleted. Or maybe there is nothing unusual about it at all. The forensic examination is what can help distinguish between those possibilities. And this is where the TikTok discussion needs to be handled carefully. The woman online may be drawing attention to details that deserve examination, but she does not have the authority to establish what happened. Neither do we, and neither does a viral comment section. If someone claims that a message was deleted, the question should be, can the deletion be demonstrated? If someone claims that Nolan was in a particular place, ask, what evidence places him there? If someone says the distress call audio contains Nolan's voice, ask, has the speaker been professionally identified? If someone says the phone proves something, ask, has the phone actually been forensically examined? Those questions protect the investigation from turning into a rumor contest, and they protect innocent people from being falsely accused. That matters because the online speculation has already become serious. People connected to Nolan's friends have reported harassment and threats, and attorneys representing some of the young men have pushed back against allegations they say are false. So there are two things that can be true at the same time. The family can have legitimate, unanswered questions, and people accused online can still deserve fairness. Those ideas are not contradictory. In fact, they are both necessary if the goal is to find the truth. Now let's return to the actual phone examination. Recent reporting says Nolan's family has given the district attorney's office a window from August 18 through August 21 for a joint forensic examination. That means the next stage could be very important. If the examination happens, experts may begin working through the device. They may preserve its contents. They may recover deleted or hidden information where technically possible. They may examine application data. They may compare timestamps. And they may compare the phone against information received from the technology companies. That process can take time. It is not something that should be rushed, simply because the public wants an answer tonight. A proper forensic examination is supposed to be careful, and that brings us to another important development. The Jackson County District Attorney has publicly defended the investigation while saying that prosecutors cannot share everything they know while an active investigation is underway. That means there may be information the public simply does not have yet, and that can be frustrating, especially when social media is moving much faster than the official investigation. A TikTok creator can post a video tonight. Millions of people can watch it tomorrow, but investigators may still be waiting for records from a technology company. That is the difference between public speculation and evidence collection. One happens instantly, the other takes time. And that is why I want you to subscribe to this channel. Not because I want you to believe every new claim. Quite the opposite. Subscribe because we're going to keep following the evidence and separate what is actually established from what is merely being repeated online. Because the Nolan Wells case doesn't need another rumor. It needs answers. And if the phone examination produces new information, that could be one of the most significant developments since Nolan's body was recovered. But there is still one major problem. Even if the phone tells us what Nolan was doing digitally, it may not tell us everything that happened to him physically. For that, we have to return to the distress call, the people who were on the boat, and the final known timeline. And that's where the story becomes even more difficult. Because the phone may tell us where the digital trail goes, but investigators still need to determine where Nolan himself went. At the end of all of this, there is one thing that matters more than TikTok, more than a viral theory, more than a suspicious comment, more than somebody claiming they have uncovered a secret: evidence. And right now, Nolan Wells' phone may be one of the most important pieces of evidence still waiting to be fully examined. The family says it wants a joint forensic examination. Recent reporting says the family gave the district attorney's office an August 18 to 21 window for that examination. And if that examination proceeds, there are several things investigators could potentially learn. First, they can establish what information remains on the phone. Second, they can determine whether deleted information can be recovered. Third, they can examine application data. Fourth, they can compare the phone's information with records obtained from outside companies. And fifth, they can compare all of that against the witness accounts. That last part may be the most important, because evidence does not exist in isolation. Suppose a witness says Nolan was sitting somewhere at 4 p.m. The phone says something different. That doesn't automatically prove the witness lied. Maybe somebody else had the phone. Maybe the timestamp is wrong. Maybe the phone's location is only approximate. Investigators have to work through those possibilities. But now there is something concrete to investigate. And that is much better than arguing over what somebody thinks happened. The same applies to the TikTok woman. Her claims may deserve attention. But they should also be tested. If she says there is a missing detail, investigators should ask where the detail came from. If she identifies a person, investigators should determine whether that identification is correct. If she points to the distress call audio, experts can examine the original recording. If she identifies a photograph or video, investigators can determine its source and timestamp. That is how a social media claim becomes useful. Not because it went viral, because somebody can verify it. And there is a broader reason this matters. The public has now been given several different pieces of the Nolan Wells story. The friends have one account. The family has raised questions about that account. The independent autopsy did not establish a definitive cause and manner of death. The official investigation continues. The district attorney says she cannot publicly discuss everything investigators know. And the family has turned to technology companies for records that might help reconstruct Nolan's final hours. That is a complicated picture. But complicated does not mean impossible. It means the investigation has to be methodical. One of the biggest questions remains what happened after Nolan was last independently seen. The recent independent analytical review described a material gap in the timeline between Nolan's last independently corroborated sighting and the reported departure of the boat. That gap is important because the entire investigation eventually has to answer one basic question. Where was Nolan? Not where his phone was. Not where somebody thought he was. Not where somebody online believes he was. Where was Nolan? And who can independently establish that? That is why the witnesses matter. That is why the phone matters. That is why the videos matter. That is why the GPS information matters. And that is why the distress call matters. Each piece potentially covers part of the same timeline. The goal is to make them fit. Or, if they don't fit, determine why. Now consider the distress call again. The call itself is not a rumor. It was made from the boat. The caller reported that the boat was taking on water. The recording has been publicly released and analyzed, and background voices have become part of the debate. But the online interpretations have gone much further than the recording itself. Some people hear specific words. Some believe they identify Nolan. Some believe the audio suggests something more serious happened aboard the boat. But unless those voices can be reliably identified, those interpretations remain interpretations. That is why the original recording matters. And if investigators can compare the audio with the phone records, they may be able to establish more about who was communicating and when. Maybe the evidence will support the existing account. Maybe it will complicate it. Maybe it will answer a question nobody has been asking. We don't know. And that uncertainty is exactly where responsible reporting has to stop. Because it would be easy to give you a dramatic ending. We could say, the TikTok woman has exposed the truth. We could say, the phone contains a bombshell. We could say, the timeline proves something sinister. But none of those conclusions has been established by the evidence currently available to the public. And I would rather give you a story that is accurate than one that is simply dramatic. There is already enough drama in what happened to Nolan. An 18-year-old went to Horn Island on July 4th. He did not return with his friends. His body was recovered 2 days later. His family has questioned the explanation surrounding his decision to remain behind. His independent autopsy did not establish a definitive cause or manner of death. And now his phone is at the center of a forensic dispute. Those are facts that are already serious enough. We do not need to manufacture anything. The latest development is that the family says it is ready for the phone to be examined jointly. And that could be important, because once experts examine the device, the conversation may change. If there are deleted messages, investigators may have a chance to determine what happened. If there are location records, they may help establish movement. If there are photographs or videos, they may help place people at particular locations. If the phone's information matches the witness accounts, that could strengthen those accounts. And if it contradicts them, investigators will have another question to answer. But there is another possibility. The phone may not provide the breakthrough people expect. It may contain incomplete data. It may not have retained everything. Some information may be encrypted. Some information may only exist with the service provider. Some records may no longer be available. And some questions may remain unanswered even after a complete forensic examination. That is something viewers should be prepared for, because investigations rarely provide one magical piece of evidence that explains everything. Sometimes the truth emerges from dozens of small details: a timestamp here, a photograph there, a witness statement, a GPS record, a phone call, a piece of video. And eventually, the timeline becomes clearer. That is what Nolan's family is asking for: clarity. Not a viral theory, not a social media battle, not a conclusion based on a few seconds of audio. They want to know what happened to their son. And that is why the TikTok discussion matters only if it leads investigators toward evidence. The woman online may have raised a question. The family has raised questions about the phone. The subpoenas may produce answers. The forensic examination may reveal something new, and the official investigation may eventually establish what happened. But until then, we have to keep one sentence in mind: a question is not a conclusion. If you have been following this case, I want to hear from you. After everything we've examined, the TikTok claims, the phone dispute, the subpoenas, the distress call, and the timeline, what is the one question you believe investigators still need to answer? Put it in the comments, and please keep the discussion respectful. People connected to this case have already faced enormous public pressure, and nobody should be accused of a crime simply because a social media theory points a finger at them. If you want to follow the Nolan Wells investigation as new evidence comes out, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because the next development could be the phone examination itself. And if that examination reveals something important, we will be here to break down what it actually shows, not what somebody claims it shows. For now, the biggest question remains unanswered. What happened during Nolan Wells' final hours? The TikTok videos may have started another conversation, but the phone may help tell us whether that conversation is based on evidence or simply another theory. And until the evidence speaks for itself, Nolan's story remains unfinished.
We are begging, if anyone knows anything, his friends, strangers, please call the hotline, because we will not be able to rest until we get answers.